Welcome to Lair the Alchemist and another edition of Sabbath Sunday. Darren is here with me again, and we are going to be rounding out, closing up some of the remaining questions that we have. So let's jump right in here, Darren. We got some interesting questions. I have a question here from username YT, and he says, my first gateway to heavy metal was through Judas Priest in the early 80s. However, I had known who Black Sabbath was, but as a kid, I was too scared to try and listen to their music. There was something ominous about their names, song titles, album covers, Ozzy himself, connection to horror and religion that just made me fear them. As kids growing up and listening to Black Sabbath and becoming acquainted with them, do you or Darren ever remember, quote, being scared, unquote, of what you were listening to or seeing? And does a particular, quote, scary moment stick in your mind about a song or album? For instance, when I listened to your Into the Void podcast on the Mob Rules, and Darren talked about his friend's reaction to E5150 coming on the car radio and just freaking out, I really connected with that story. Yeah, I can say Black Sabbath had the same reaction on me. It's funny you asked that question there, YT, because I've been thinking about this. I recently saw a documentary on The Exorcist, and they were talking about how when it was in the movie theaters, people were fainting, they had ambulances lined up outside, and they had interviews and clips with people before they were going into the theater, and people were standing in line, and you could just see everyone was so worked up. And it really made me think about those early days before the internet, when bands could have this sort of aura and vibe and mystery and scariness about them. And Black Sabbath was one of those bands for me. The name was scary. The song titles, some of the song titles were scary. The lyrics were scary. The album covers, like Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, I remember being like, whoa, as a Catholic school kid, that was set, the cover of that scared me. But one song that I really, hearing the song Black Sabbath, I remember the first time I heard that creeped me out. The bell, the way the song was so sort of cavernous and Bill Ward's kind of tribal, primitive drum beat. I also remember being scared by that laughing at the end of the writ that fades into Am I Going Insane Radio. That freaked me out the first time that the 11-year-old me heard it. But the one that really scared me was Under the Sun. I can distinctly remember when I first got that cassette, I came down in the middle of the night. I had listened to it during the day, but I didn't finish it. And so I came down in the middle of the night into my garage in my parents' house, and I was sitting out there with a dimly lit light bulb on a cheap little boom box, and I was listening to it. When it got to the end of that song, that main riff and the way that song ends with the way it slows down and everything, I just remember being it was in the dead of winter, a dark garage, the middle of the night. I just remember being scared. I remember I thought I saw something move at the other side of the garage. It just terrified me. I turned the tape off and I ran into the house. And to this day, I still sometimes think of that when I'm listening to the song Under the Sun. So I can totally relate to what you're saying there, YT. I had Black Sabbath totally did that for me. And I missed those days. I don't know if it was just being young, the age that we lived in, where stories would get told about Black Sabbath and songs, and in your mind the kids are talking on the school bus, and how that goes, things get exaggerated, stories get blown out of proportion. But yeah, Black Sabbath totally did that to me.
Yeah, as a kid, I had a sensitivity to horror, but by the same token, I was also very attracted to it. I loved horror movies. I loved comic books and horror magazines, but I also had a sensitivity to it. So if I saw a movie trailer on TV, and it was often not so much like gore or anything like overtly monster or anything like that. It was more of like the suggestion, the psychological. The Omen freaked me out when I saw
Yeah.
that. Definitely The Exorcist, man. But I was so curious to see it. And then when I did, I was scared for like 2 weeks. I mean, I would like sleep in my bed, like paralyzed, staring at the ceiling. And that's no fun. But it kind of was because I mean, it's a strange dynamic. It's
Yeah.
you're attracted to it, and you want to be scared, and then when you are, it's kind of an uncomfortable feeling. But you know you're going to get over it, and then it's like that which doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So it sets you up for the next horror challenge. If you make it through The Exorcist, well, then you can move on to something. I don't know. I mean, what did I go from there? Friday the 13th or something. Um,
Yeah.
so I always had a sensitivity to horror, and but by the time I was listening to Black Sabbath, I think I had already gotten beyond what would be considered scary in the music. But I know what you mean. And when my friend referenced being freaked out by Mob Rules when we were listening to it in the car, I kind of had to laugh because I knew where he was coming from. It didn't have that effect on me, but I knew what he was a big Rush fan, and his tastes were a little bit more on the commercial side of music, like he liked Journey and stuff like that. And it's cool, but I was into more of the heavier stuff. So, like I said, we were coming back from a Rush Power Windows concert, and I had a cassette tape. We were listening to. I had Rush on one side. I don't remember which album. I think Fly By Night, memory serves. And then it was either I flipped it over or it automatically flipped over in this cassette deck, and it started playing Mob Rules, and we got a couple songs into it. He's like, "Man, you got to turn this on. I'm going to crash my car. It's freaking me out. It sounds like this is like devil worship music." And I just laugh because it's not. But anyway, it's funny. But to get back on point, the songs that I could understand and I felt like a sense of horror vibe, definitely the song Black Sabbath. I mean, it's still, it has a chilling sound. It's one of those songs you want to play around Halloween, you know. Uh, but I will say the one thing that did kind of freak me out, I had to kind of look around the room. I was sitting in my room listening to Master of Reality, and when it got to the end of Children of the Grave, like, I was looking around, man. That kind of freaked me out a little bit. I didn't expect that, and it was very similar to um, Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
The I wonder if that was maybe the influence for that, because they're very similar.
Yeah, they are.
Although there's in Children of the Grave, he's obviously saying "Children of the Grave," children of
Yeah.
the grave. And Friday the 13th it's just effect. They're very similar. So I wonder if one didn't. I wonder if Children of the Grave didn't influence that. But anyway, those are the two that I would say uh, kind of freaked me out a little bit. Not in a bad way, not in a way that you know scared me or anything, but had an effect, had a horror effect, which at that time I was really into. That made it all the more cool having
Yeah.
that extension, that horror extension to it.
I think part of it could have been my Catholic upbringing too, so I was always scared by movies like you mentioned, The Omen, The Exorcist. Another one that really did it for me was Amityville Horror.
Yeah,
Those types of movies. You saw Amityville Horror, and you were here that night when I went to bed. I was hearing
yeah.
every squeak,
I forgot about that one.
every
Yeah,
little. We
yeah.
had like an old. I can't remember. It was like water. The heating system in our house made a lot of noise when it kicked
Uh,
on. That type of thing. And it
yeah.
was always those kinds of things, the sort of supernatural suspense
Yep.
type of stuff. Wasn't necessarily like monsters, and so Black Sabbath sort of tapped in to a little bit of that for me. Their album
Yeah.
covers like Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and the first album cover was very mysterious looking, and so it sort of played into all that
I
for
mean, I
me.
think it was by design too, because if you remember, I'm sure you've heard, and it's been well documented that when Black Sabbath became Black Sabbath, the name change from Earth to Black Sabbath was uh, they were looking out a window and there was a movie theater across the street, and they saw that it was the movie Black Sabbath, Boris Karloff, and they saw people lined up to go in and see it. And Geezer noted, and isn't it funny how attractive people are to horror? Maybe we should do that or incorporate that in our music. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something to the effect where they took that influence and applied it to their music. And obviously, I mean, it paid off, because I think that was part of what attracted people to Black Sabbath, was that horror element, that excitement that comes with horror, that the thrill of being scared. I mean, obviously that's something that everybody likes, for lack of a better word. But I mean, horror movies, horror thrill rides around Halloween. We have haunted houses and haunted hay rides and things like that. I mean, these are all things that people are attracted to, and I think that Geezer had the idea to hone in on that, and I think that it paid off. And certainly, I mean, moving forward with the imagery and stuff like that, it created this extra dimension to Black Sabbath's music. While, like we talked about, there are certain songs that have a chilling effect, but there's a lot of songs that aren't anywhere near having anything to do with horror. There's a reality aspect, but then you get into Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and the album cover kind of looks like something you'd see on a monster magazine or a horror movie poster, which incidentally the guy that illustrated that did a lot of horror movie and science fiction, but he did do movie posters. But anyway, as a counterpoint to the cover, there were songs like Sabracadabra, so it wasn't a consistently present element to the music, but when it was there, it was effective. And in the 70s, I think that was kind of the height of psychological horror, when we had movies like The Exorcist and The Omen and Rosemary's Baby and Carrie, I guess you could say. That was kind of a psychological subject. And so, yeah, I mean, there was kind of a sensitivity. And because of the time, not everything was exploited all over the internet and things like that. So there was always the element of shock and the element of surprise. So I think that lent itself to the sensitivity that people had to horror, and it being present in movies and music and literature, things like that.
All right, you want to read the next question?
Which band did, Mike G asks, which band did Ozzy collaborate with in hopes of calling it Blizzard of Oz during first split up Sabbath with Dave Walker at this time? ? So that would have been around 76, I think. And I think it was around the time, maybe it was after they recorded Technical Ecstasy. Ozzy left to try to see if he could do something on his own. He was, and we've talked about this on the Technical Ecstasy podcast, I'm pretty sure. But Ozzy was getting fed up with the way the Black Sabbath was recording records, and didn't want there to be this, elaborate production. So he wanted to try to do his own thing and see if he could do it. So he paired up with the guys in Necromandus to try to form what would be the initial first incarnation of the Blizzard of Oz. And supposedly they rehearsed, and I don't know if there was any recordings that exist, but they did rehearse and jam around for a little while, but it didn't play out. It didn't pan out. It could have been because of Ozzy's state of mind at the time, but he did go back, obviously, to Black Sabbath. And no, I don't think it was during the Dave Walker time. I think it was prior to that. I think it was on Ozzy's time, but for all intents and purposes, the band was still functioning normally. But I think Ozzy on the side was working with Necromandus to try to see if he could do a solo thing. Didn't work out.
And Iommi would go on to produce the first Necromandus album.
I think that's where the association derived from. They had been working on, Tony had been producing them, and I think he was even managing them. And so, because in Black Sabbath had been playing with them, I think that's how Ozzy became acquainted with the guys in Necromandus.
Yeah. Okay, he had some other parts to his question, I think.
Oh, okay. Is Forbidden really bad? Are any of you guys a big defender of that album? I don't. Is it bad? There's aspects of it that I think are questionable. It sounds a little rushed to me, and I think from what I've read that Tony Martin did sort of rush through it. You know, the lyrics aren't very good, at least not in comparison to some of the other lyrics that he's written previous albums. I wouldn't say it's really bad. It's probably my least favorite Black Sabbath album. When we did our Black Sabbath ranking, it was dead last for me. Doesn't mean it's bad, but as it falls in line with the other Black Sabbath albums, like I did put it last. So I wouldn't say I'm a big defender of it, but it's like, you know, obviously we're big Black Sabbath fans, so it's okay if John or I, you know, trash it. But if someone else who isn't part of what I would consider to be in the inner circle of Sabbath fans trashes it, I'm going to defend it. You know, I'd always defend Ozzy. You know, I have on the video shows that we've done. But you know, I understand where people come from when they voice criticisms about Ozzy, and I understand where people would criticize Forbidden. But it's still a Black Sabbath album, and it still has Tony Iommi, and you know, I love Tony's guitar playing. I love his guitar tone, and I don't think Black Sabbath to me has ever put out a horrible album. So to answer the second part of that question, yeah, I'll defend it. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much exactly the way I feel. It's my least favorite Sabbath album, but that doesn't mean that I think it's a terrible album or anything. I mean, Black Sabbath has so many great albums that my least my least favorite Black Sabbath album, which is Forbidden, I still like more than a lot of other people's albums. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a flawed album. It sounds kind of tired. It sounds like a band. It sounds like what the situation was, which was Iommi basically having one foot out the door towards the Ozzy reunion. So it's kind of tired. They're a little. It's kind of like the last dying breaths of a dinosaur. You know, it's like they're a little out of their element at this point. When did that album come out? Like 95 or 96 or something like that. So
Yeah,
knee
95.
deep. It's knee deep in the grunge era. Sabbath is it just doesn't know what to do with themselves at that point. I think that Tony Martin sounds a little tired to me. His voice sounds like it's a little maybe hoarse or
Yeah,
damaged a
yeah,
little. You know, the big thing that people love to point out on that record is the mix. When, yeah, it's not the greatest mix in the world for sure. But to me, that's not really where the problem lies on that record. To me, it just lies with with some of the songs, but there's still some cool songs on it. You know, there are some things that I do like about Forbidden. It is Tony Iommi. So there is some cool stuff, and it is kind of a fun record to, it's the Black Sabbath album that I am least familiar with because of all the reasons that we just mentioned. So sometimes it's fun. In fact, I was just listening to it. I was on a Tony Martin kick for a couple of days, and I was sort of revisiting it. And it's kind of fun to listen to it. I was even watching a video of them on that tour, so it was kind of fun to hear a couple of those songs in a live setting. I think they had a little more energy, a little more life to them. So yeah, I mean, I'll defend that album. It's not Sabbath's best by any long stretch, but it's not a terrible album. When I see somebody say it's like a 0 out of 10, no. I mean, I'd give it maybe a 6 out of 10, 5 or 6 out of 10 if I had to rank it. But yeah, I'm good. Like Darren said, if I'm out somewhere and somebody starts dumping on the Tony Martin era and they bring up Forbidden, I'll come to its defense. Yeah. I'll take them out in the back alley. And I have a friend that I went to high school with that he really likes that record. And
yeah. That's cool.
Always real high. I know a few people that actually really like that album.
Yeah. Nah, it's not terrible. It's not my favorite, but, but I did see them on that tour, and they were great. And I've talked about this before, that I really do think that Tony Martin was a great singer for Black Sabbath. And when you saw the Tony Martin fronted Sabbath, you got the advantage of hearing good versions of Ozzy era songs, just as good versions of Dio era songs, and plus a lot of great material from the albums that he was on. It was a really great concert. It was cool hearing the entire range of eras in one evening. And he was a good front man. Like I said, I think he could have been a little bit more assertive. I don't know how. I never really thought of it from the aspect of what would I do or what should he have done differently. I don't know, but he seemed, and it's a good thing, but he's always seemed very, obviously very respectful of his position in the band and the band's legacy. I wish he would have taken, I guess I could say that I wish he would have taken a little bit more ownership of it. He seemed to be a guy that was playing with Sabbath, not a part of Sabbath. And that's probably where I wish he was a little bit more assertive. When Dio was in Sabbath, he was Sabbath.
Yeah.
He was the singer. And that, attributed to his value in the band. I mean, he put himself, he went all in.
Yeah.
And good.
And it might have been part of that, might have been, of course, when Ozzy was in Black Sabbath, all of them were unknown entities. But Dio walked in with some credentials under his belt.
Yeah.
Gillan certainly had, big credentials. Glenn Hughes had a name. I guess Tony Martin really is the first guy to walk into the situation and to not really have, I mean, he played in bands before he was in Black Sabbath, but he didn't have any high profile bands that he was in.
No,
Gillan and Hughes and
yeah, no,
Lonnie
I'd agree.
were. So that too might have had a little bit of a thing where he was, and he also kind of came in under, sort of difficult circumstances. Ray Gillan, who would go on to sing in Badlands with Jakey Lee, here the Black Sabbath family tree. Jakey Lee, of course, played on 2 Ozzy albums. Ray Gillan was the original singer during the Eternal Idol, right? When Glenn Hughes quickly left the band during the 7 Star Tour, Ray Gillan comes in, finishes the tour. They start the Eternal Idol album. It's not clicking with Ray Gillan, so they bring Tony Martin in. And for people that don't know the history of the Eternal Idol, that Ray Gillan basically recorded that record. And you can hear that Ray Gillan version on the deluxe version of Eternal Idol that they did so many 5-7 years ago. And pretty much Tony Martin was just told to come in and sing it just like it was did Ray Gillan did it. So Tony Martin came in very much at the last minute and had to just kind of jump in, sing lyrics and melody lines that were already done by somebody else. So he really didn't have his first crack at asserting his own identity onto the band until Headless Cross.
Mm.
And and maybe it was just a situation where Black Sabbath at that point with Headless Cross is trying to, they've got Cozy Powell in the band. They're trying to reignite a rebirth of sorts to the Black Sabbath name. They're trying to, I won't say move it in a new direction, but it was trying to start a new era.
Are you talking about the Headless Cross here, or?
Yeah, when Cozy Powell came into the band, I think they were really trying to solidify the lineup and start it not from zero. They weren't starting from scratch, but I think that they were sort of trying to create a new.
Yeah, I think even from the album cover, which I'm wearing my Headless Cross shirt.
Cool.
The album cover was, intended to be iconic. The cross, bringing the cross back. The old English lettering. The cover alone, it was simple. Prior to that, I mean, we had, I guess they had sort of gotten away from it. There was they couldn't use the statue by Rodin. They couldn't get permission to use it, so they had people. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about Eternal Idol.
Yeah, the
album cover
cover.
for Eternal Idol. So the two people that are on the cover are in the same position as a statue by the sculptor Rodin, which they couldn't get the permission to use, so they had people imitate the statue. But there was nothing about it that really was like you would expect of the Black Sabbath imagery. And then prior to that, you had Seven Star, which was just a picture of Tony Iommi in the center. The borders had some woodcut. I think it was Albrecht Dürer woodcuts that were a little bit more of a macabre type of theme. But on Headless Cross, we got back to the iconic cross and the Old English font and everything. So that set just from the cover alone, a statement of intent was made pretty clear. And you're right when you said that Tony Martin came in and basically he sang to the best of his ability Ray Gillen's vocals verbatim, pretty much. I mean, you don't notice, you don't know, you're not aware of it until you hear the demo, and then it's like, oh my God, I mean, that's exactly what Ray Gillen did. But Tony Iommi did an admirable job with that. It sounds fantastic. Not as good as Ray Gillen per se, but that's a subjective call. But on Headless Cross, yeah, he does get more of his own personality. He sings the songs a little differently. You could hear him get a little bit more guttural in his voice. There's not as much of the higher mid to high range that there was on Eternal Idol. He starts to get a little more guttural, a little lower on Headless Cross, a little more expressive. And yeah, so he did kind of come into his own on Headless Cross.
All right, I think there's one more part to his question.
Did Eddie Van Halen really play the solo on Evil Eye like many claim? It sounds so Iommian to these ears. Or did EVH play it that way as sort of a homage to Tony? John.
All right, well, yeah, I did a little research on this because I've heard that story too, that Eddie Van Halen played the solo on it, but was uncredited for contractual reasons. And there's an interview with Tony Iommi right after Eddie Van Halen had passed, and the interviewer asked that question about Evil Eye, and Iommi tells the story that they were working and rehearsing songs for the Cross Purposes album, which is the album that Evil Eye is on, and Van Halen was in town, and Tony and Eddie were already friends. Tony invited Eddie over to their rehearsal space, even picked up a guitar for him from a local guitar shop because Tony's left-handed, Eddie Van Halen's right-handed. And they came in and he said, hey, you want to hear a song we're working on? And it was Evil Eye. And so Eddie jammed along with them. And in the rehearsal, Eddie was soloing on it. And Tony Iommi says that then when they went to record the song later on, he tried to capture the spirit of what Eddie had done at that rehearsal. But so, no, Eddie didn't play on the recording, but he was there when they were working on the song and I guess inspired the solo. You might want to say it that way.
And he does get a credit.
Yeah, we weren't sure about this. We looked, it says that he was uncredited for contractual reasons, but maybe, we don't know if maybe on a later pressing of the record or on the CD reissues, maybe it does mention his name. But if you look in Wikipedia, it says that he wrote that song, but was part of the writing team on that song, but was uncredited. So yeah, an interesting little piece of Sabbath trivia.
Yeah, for sure. That is good trivia.
All right, I'm not sure if we answered this next question, but if we haven't, I don't know, we'll just answer it again. ESTEEB67 says, if Sabbath didn't implode after Never Say Die and Technical Ecstasy, with the musical trajectory of those two albums, what do you think they would have done next with Ozzy musically? Would a Heaven and Hell exist, or would they have gone down the road they were headed with those two records?
I did speculate on this when we talked about. I think it was one of the Dio era on our podcast, and
Yeah, I think I remember us sort of
yeah, I
thinking,
recommended, or I thought that they're what they should have done was probably taken a break for about a year, or until they felt they were in the right state of mind to get back together and start writing again. In Heaven and Hell, there were some songs that they worked on, or Iommi. Uh, I think Children of the Sea was one of the ones that he presented to the band. Maybe Ozzy sang on it, fleshed out a melody of sorts. Um, was there another one that I think he started working on the song Heaven and Hell too? Um,
maybe, yeah,
but from and it's all speculation. I mean, but it's fun to talk about what could have been. I think if they had taken a break, reconvened after a little while, and if they had worked with a producer, possibly Martin Birch, rather than Tony being saddled with the responsibility of the production, which he did a great job. And I know from when we were doing our research about Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, that Tony started to become overwhelmed with the daunting task of doing the production of those albums while everybody else was coming and going, and when they were in Florida, those guys being at poolside or on the beach, and Tony was inside the studio working. So I think that created some of the friction too. So I think if they had taken a break, maybe worked out some of their issues, got back into the studio or in a rehearsal space with clear heads, who knows? I mean, what would it have sounded like? Um, I think it probably would have sounded musically very close to Heaven and Hell, but with Ozzy's melodies, if you can imagine that, it is kind of hard because we're so used to hearing Heaven and Hell the way it is with Dio's voice. But if you use your imagination, you can kind of hear what Ozzy may have done with some of the melodies in that, and I think that it may have been better in a way because I think we would have had more involvement from Geezer. Geezer sort of stepped aside for that. Um, Bill was sort of disenfranchised. He wasn't really sold on the idea of continuing Sabbath without Ozzy. He felt some guilt because he was the one that, gave Ozzy his walking papers. So that was also in the background too, the emotional aspect of the band not being the same original four, and that was kind of a shadow that was cast over it. So with that being in a different light, it may have. I think that the key to it would have been for the four members to just sort of take a break, reconvene, clear heads, get back, and try to be creative again. And I think it probably would have worked, but it didn't happen. So it is what it is.
yeah, I agree. I think that they would not have continued in the vein of Never Say Die. I think that they all recognized that uh, they were sort of grasping at straws with Never Say Die. So no, they wouldn't have continued down the road of saxophones and you know, things like that. The more experimental nature of the stuff that was on Never Say Die. So in an ideal situation, they would have taken some time off, gotten their addictions in order. And the other thing is that of course it wouldn't have been exactly like Heaven and Hell because Ronnie's influence on that record is immense and massive. But there was something in the air, something in the water that the zeitgeist of the musical consciousness, collective consciousness at that time, that a lot of bands in 1980 all sort of moved in this more focused, more tighter songs, better production. You think about all the albums that came out in 1980, Ace of Spades, Saxon released what? Strong Arm of the Law, and was it
No, it was Wheels of
Wheels of
Steel.
Steel? And well, they released two albums in 1980, didn't they? Wheels of Steel
Wheels of Steel was first, though. Wheels of Steel, then
and then Strong Arm
Strong
of the
Arm.
Law.
Yeah.
Uh, who else did AC/DC releases Back in Black? You can go down the list. There's all
British
these.
Steel. British
British
Steel was
Steel
kind
is
of,
released in 1980. All these bands sort of start leaving behind that more jammy experimental nature of the 70s. And they're all moving in this more focused, concise, tighter songwriting. Ozzy did it with Blizzard of Oz. So I
yeah.
think that they would have moved in that direction anyways. The album, of course, wouldn't have sounded exactly like it was, but I think that they would have moved in that direction. It was just the musical climate had changed and they would have moved along with it. I think that they realized, all parties realized they needed a fresh start. When Ozzy left, Iommi knew, okay, we have to start fresh. Ozzy knew he had to start fresh. None of them went, I mean, Ozzy could have easily, if they all loved the Never Say Die album, they would have continued in that vein, or Ozzy in his first solo album might have tried to sound like Never Say Die and Technical Ecstasy, but they all knew that they had to start fresh and move somewhere,
Yeah.
different. And so I think they would have done it. It certainly would have been interesting. Yeah, it is a fun thing to sort of guess about and speculate, and it would be a fun challenge for, you see people do all kinds of crazy things on YouTube for somebody to take a song from Heaven and Hell and find somebody who has a voice like Ozzy and try to interpret those songs in a different way with Ozzy's voice.
Yeah.
That will be a really interesting,
Yeah.
and impossible to do because those songs are so ingrained in our minds the way they are. But
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear somebody though, and to sing it in the style of Ozzy, because there's that band that replicates Kiss music from the 74 to 77 era, called Classic 78, and they write music that sounds like what they think Kiss may have done. It'd be interesting to do that with Sabbath too, to write music, or even to use the Heaven and Hell music and then try to replicate what you think Ozzy may have done based on the experience that we have with his singing style and the
yeah,
melodies that he's sang previously, to try to like use your imagination and do something in the style of Ozzy. It'd be kind of cool.
yeah, I saw a guitar player on YouTube where he had the vocal melody for Under the Graveyard off of Ozzy's most recent record, but he had never heard the song. So the only thing that he had heard was Ozzy's melody for Under the Graveyard. And
Mm.
he put his own version of the chords
Oh wow, never heard
underneath
that.
it with no influence from the original song. And it
Yeah.
was really fascinating. He listened to the melody line, he figured out what key it was in and the
Mm.
possible things he could play underneath it. And he sort of,
Yeah.
tried to do something Ozzy like with the guitar and everything underneath it. And it was a real fascinating, it was, in my
Pretty good.
opinion, I think it was better than
Was it? Was it
better than
better?
the Ozzy version, because the
Yeah.
guy was kind of trying to do it in the style of like
Yeah.
early Ozzy, and it was interesting.
I didn't really thought that. I mean, I like the song. I think it's pretty cool. I like Ozzy's melody, but I mean, that's really all it is. It's just Ozzy's melody. There isn't really any guitar
No,
to really speak of. I mean, it's there, but it's not. It doesn't stand out for me. I mean, if you incorporated Ozzy's melody with a really cool guitar riff somehow, integrated that in with Ozzy's voice, I mean, you really have like pretty amazing song. But really, all you have on that Ordinary Man is just Ozzy's melodies,
yeah.
in my opinion, anyway.
All right, there you go. There's another edition of Sabbath Sunday for you, Darren and I, answering some of your questions. We didn't mention at the beginning, if you don't know already, Darren and I have a podcast, Into the Void, a Black Sabbath podcast. I'll leave a link to that below. You can hear us going way more in depth into all of these various Sabbath albums and Sabbath topics. So another edition here. We're going to have more Sabbath Sundays coming up. We're going to be doing some fun, different things with some lists and stuff like that. So make sure you're on the lookout for that. And until we see you again, make sure you stay heavy, stay metal.